Do you think the economic system in America has been set up to benefit you or to make things harder? Today, I'm going to talk about why I think Americans have been programmed to be poor. And when you listen to this, it's probably going to make you a little bit angry. To do this, we're going to talk about two things: the American economic system and the American educational system. Let's talk about the economic system first. Well, it all started a long time ago on the farm. If you look at the United States, most families were family businesses. The young people stayed at home and worked with the dad and the mom on the farm. They produced a lot of their own goods. Often the clothing was produced there. Often the food was grown there. Everything they needed, they had. Some people began to leave the farm and go into the cities. But you still had people desiring to own small shops. I mean, they were entrepreneurial. They might be a shoemaker. They might be a tailor. But the thing is, they passed those skill sets down to their children and their grandchildren. They had apprenticeship programs going all the time. But then we entered the third phase, and this is where things began to break down. People were instructed that they would make more money if they would come work at the factory. So you had the assembly lines start to come into being. Henry Ford was one of the first to really create this. It made it really great for the corporation because it cut costs, but the work was so mundane. No one needed any skill sets that they learned from the family. It was very simple to be taught what to do on the assembly line. Probably the first day at work you were taught that. And nothing is passed down to the next generation. In fact, the next generations will not benefit from this at all. If something happens to you, or when something happens to you and you die, they're starting from scratch every time. And then we came to the fourth phase, the information phase, and it's really no different. It's just like the assembly line. You're just working for a big company, maybe a little bigger boss. You might make a little bit better salary, but it's still a salary, and you're still trading your infinitely valuable time for a little bit of someone else's money, and you're not learning anything you can pass down to your children, your grandchildren. You're not going to create generational wealth or any type of wealth at all. Perhaps the worst side effect of this whole thing is that it destroys the entrepreneurial spirit. America was built on that. 36% of the American workers were self-employed, teaching their kids and their grandkids the skill sets. And today, only 9% of the American people are entrepreneurs. And that's according to the American Enterprise Institute. In fact, the same group says that in the last 15 years, the number of new businesses started has declined by 33%. Now, here's another quote from the same group. I'm going to read this to you because it's pretty powerful. These declines in business formation and startup activity are a problem for the American economy, but they're also a problem for the American in a deeper cultural sense. Perhaps entrepreneurship is in decline because Americans have lost the can-do spirit. Perhaps the fire has gone out of modern Americans and they are content with economic stagnation and workplace drudgery. Wow. I mean, I'm not content with that, and I don't think you are either, but we've been educated into it. The way it used to be is you had a whole family of skilled people who were experts at what they do. It was so powerful that nothing could stop it, and it created an empire for the family. And to contrast that with today, everybody is an individual. And you may think that's a good thing, but in this case, it's not, because everybody is an individual worker bee. And the scary thing is that the whole time this was happening, the American educational system morphed into this big conveyor belt that just dropped people off on the factory floor and fed this machine. Now, about the time the industrial age began to really take off, you had Henry Ford inventing the assembly line. Education began to follow that example. And now the educational system comes in and figures out exactly from kindergarten through the MBA program how to create worker bees for this system. A man named John Dewey, who is often known as the father of education in America, actually patterned the way he designed elementary schools and high schools after Henry Ford's assembly line. So now all of a sudden you take children and you lockstep them into grades. And so you lockstep them in according to their age, not according to their gifts that God gave them or the things that they want to do with their life or their abilities, but just because they're 6 years old, they're first grade, 7 years old, they're second grade. It's a one-size-fit-all system, kind of like an assembly line in a Ford automobile factory. Why did you take English grammar over and over again for 12 years in school? I mean, you studied something that could have taken 3 years to master. You studied every year for 12 years. And then when you get to college, you got to take 2 more courses in it and then a literature course. Okay, so how is that helping you know anything about creating generational wealth, how money works in the real world, what God says about the family business and learning skill sets and passing them down and financial leverage? You're not learning any of that. So all you know is some basic information so that you can go work for a corporation. In this system, you've been led to believe that if you get a great education and you get a job and you make a reasonable salary, you can live your whole life and get to the end and have a little bit saved up where you could live the rest of your life comfortably. I found an interesting film called Top Documentary Films College Conspiracy. And in this film, I found this quote: "The college industrial complex has created not only myths, but outright hoaxes in order to scam American students into becoming indentured servants for life." To whom? To industry or to government. It continued this way: "Built on the factory model, mass education taught basic reading, writing, and arithmetic, a bit of history, and other subjects. And this was the overt curriculum. But beneath all that was the covert curriculum. And that was far more basic. It consisted of 3 courses: punctuality, obedience, and repetitive work. In other words, being bored out of my mind." I remember that, don't you? And it continues: "The basic training requirements were those which produce reliable, productive factory workers who would take orders from a management hierarchy without questioning those orders. And it demanded men and women prepared to slave away at machines or in offices performing brutally repetitive jobs." And this has gone on so long, we're okay with it. Harvard was founded in 1636. It was named by its first benefactor, who was John Harvard, who was a pastor. All right. The College of William and Mary was founded in 1693, and the first president of this college was the Reverend James Blair, a pastor who served as the president for 50 years. And then you had Yale. It was founded in 1701 by conservative Puritan ministers who had grown disenchanted with the liberal nature of Harvard University. And the greatest preacher in American history is named Jonathan Edwards. He was perhaps the greatest pastor of all during the Great Awakening of America, and he served as the president of Princeton University, and his grandson served as the president of Yale. So these renowned schools were all started by preachers, and guess where their information came from for their textbooks? The Bible. Look at these schools today. They're totally secularized. They're teaching the opposite of the Protestant ethic, anything that John Calvin would have believed, or any of us who know the Bible, right? And I'm going to quote Roger Geiger, who is a distinguished professor of education at Pennsylvania State University, and he said this: "There was nothing to be done with a bachelor's degree that could not also be done without it." And now this was in about the year 1900. So people didn't even finish their degrees because at that time they were still more into apprenticeship, learning skills and doing what the family knew how to do and so forth. But it was beginning to change. In 1972, as we move forward in history, we had Pell Grants, and all of a sudden the government started funding the colleges. If they can give money to the colleges, they can now influence what's taught there. They have that right because the college took the money. And now all of a sudden, 95% of students in college had their college paid for with government money or with government-backed loans. Now everybody's expected to go to college. A famous author and futurist named Alwyn Toffler wrote a book called Future Shock, The American Educational Model. He said mass education was the ingenious machine constructed by industrialism to produce the kind of adults it needed. How to pre-adapt children for a new world. A world of repetitive indoor toil, smoke, noise, machines, crowded living conditions, and then collective discipline. A world in which time was to be regulated not by the cycle of the sun and the moon, like on the farm, but by the factory whistle and the clock. Children today are almost universally identified by the grade they're in, and adults are identified by the job they do. That's not who I am. My job is not who I am, certainly not if I work for a factory. Now, if I own my own business, maybe it is who I am. It's the same thing my dad did, my granddad, my great-grandfather. I was fortunate to grow up and be a 4th-generation family businessman. Well, it's not that way when you work for the factory. The educational model was perpetuated by leaders like Elwood Cubberley. Now, this is one of the founders of our educational system. He said, our schools are in a sense factories in which the raw products, children, are to be shaped and fashioned into products to meet the various demands of life. Now, Elwood Patterson Cubberley was an American educator who was also a eugenicist. Do you know what that is? This man spent most of his career as professor and later served as the first dean of Stanford University Graduate School of Education in California. A eugenicist is a person who studies how to arrange reproduction within a human population to increase the occurrence of heritable characteristics regarded as desirable. Does that sound like Hitler? I mean, where does this stuff come from? Well, this is built into the American educational system. And then there was John Dewey. And this man is the one who patterned everything after the assembly line. But I don't know if you know this, but he was one of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto. In fact, many people gave him credit for writing most of it. So I could go on and on about this, but I think you get the picture. This system wants you to be a worker bee, this programming trap. So the answer is we've got to take back control of the destiny of our families and kick this lying, bad system to the curb. You don't have to start over every generation like people that are going to college, learning something the family never did before. And guess what the Bible says? Knowledge is better than gold. You know why? Because the world can take your gold away, but it can't take away what's right here between your ears. The same skill sets that made that money through your family, generationally, can make that money back. We can teach you powerful stock trading skill sets that you can pass down to your children and your grandchildren. This gives you the potential to create generational wealth God's way. Check out the links in the description below and find out all the ways that TRADEway can help your family do just that.